Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. Ivy Tech is the only public school in the state that's not getting money for major building projects. Ahead, why it's being left out.
I think we all need to make sure we know what the mission of Ivy Tech is and where we're going to go the next 5 years.
Thousands of unexploded bombs and depleted uranium sit on this abandoned Army testing site in Jefferson County. Federal law requires frequent inspections to make sure nothing harmful is leaking into the water. But the Army wants to put an end to those inspections despite concerns from residents.
I don't see why they couldn't just go in and clean it up, and then we wouldn't have to worry about the leaching into the soils and the water tables and affecting the wildlife and, of course, humanity down the stream.
What are the real risks, and what is the long-term plan for the 50,000-acre site? Plus a shakeup on the State Board of Education. Our StateImpact education team introduces us to the new members who'll be responsible for crafting the state's education policies. Those stories and the latest news headlines from across the state right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Ivy Tech is commonly touted as a success story. As you may remember, even the president paid a visit to the college's Indianapolis campus this winter. President Obama praised Ivy Tech for providing students with a quality 2-year college education and used the school as a backdrop to gain support for his plan to offer free community college for everyone.
Right here at this school, one of the best in the country, not just in the state of Indiana. You're finding ways to raise graduation rates and partner with businesses to help provide apprenticeships and other pathways to careers that pay well in fields like construction and technology.
But even praise from the president meant little when legislators last month passed the state's 2-year budget. They didn't include any money for construction projects on Ivy Tech's campuses, and they ordered the state's Commissioner for Higher Education to review Ivy Tech's programs. Sarah Whitmire reports on why the state's top lawmakers say it's time to step back and understand where Ivy Tech is going over the next 5 years before giving the college any more money for building projects.
Construction is everywhere on the campus of Indiana University. The new School of International Studies is going up, the Kelley School of Business is expanding, and the Jacobs School of Music dedicated a new studio building in the fall. It's the same story on campuses across the state. Increasing enrollments and aging infrastructure require big money for construction. The state does help out. This year, lawmakers allocated $313 million to all of the state's public schools for construction projects, with the exception of one, Ivy Tech.
It will pick it up, place it here.
Claire Berger is the Dean of Engineering Technology at Ivy Tech's East Central campus in Muncie.
We have 8 technology programs here on campus. The goal is to integrate as many of those as possible.
Ivy Tech asked the state for $25 million to construct a new building and buy computer numerical control, or CNC machines like these, that manufacturing students will need to know how to use if they want to get a job when they graduate.
You go to any manufacturer and they're going to have a small tool shop where they run lathes and mills. They're going to have CNC machines much bigger than this, but they run manufacturing parts. They're going to have robots that load the CNC machines. They're all going to have 3D printers somewhere along the line to do prototypes. So all of that we want to replicate here. That's what we're supposed to be doing, right? That's what we do for our industry partners, is to train those kind of people. And so we need some of the very basic skills. We need the space to do it.
It's expensive, Regional Chancellor Andy Bown admits, but he says the new space has been on Ivy Tech's priority list for years.
The reality is the investment that we're making needs to happen whether we're in new space or whether in the existing space. There'll need to be more investment over time from a technology standpoint. But what the new building was really going to do for us was take this incredibly cramped, overutilized space and give us the flexibility that we need to really teach manufacturing.
But for now, the project will have to wait. Lawmakers have been kind to Ivy Tech in the past, for the most part fulfilling many of the state's project requests over the last decade. But that's when enrollment was surging. The recession led to a spike in community college enrollment across the country. In 2011, the fall full-time enrollment at Ivy Tech's 30-plus campuses was about 65,000 students. Now that people are returning to the workforce, the full-time equivalent at the end of 2014 was 49,000.
So if you think of it in a per pupil funding basis, actually that means their funding, if they dropped enrollment 25%, that means their funding is up 33% on a per pupil basis.
Kinley says it was time to put on the brakes, regroup, and figure out the direction Ivy Tech is going. In addition to declining enrollment, degree completion rates are struggling. According to data from the State Commission for Higher Education, 5.2% of full-time Ivy Tech students finish their associate's degree in 2 years. In 6 years, 27.7% of those students finish. Looking at part-time students, 2.1% graduate within 2 years, and 20.8% graduate in 6 years. But retention figures don't distinguish between a student who drops out and a student who transfers. The new budget bill requires the state's Commission for Higher Education to review Ivy Tech's programs and, if necessary, order programs with low graduation rates be restructured or eliminated. Ivy Tech's president has said he welcomes that review because he believes it will lead to a better understanding about the school's effectiveness. Higher Education Commissioner Teresa Lubbers says the review process is at the very beginning, but ultimately she believes it will identify where the gaps in performance are, where the success points are, and ensure that Ivy Tech, the Commission, and the legislature are all operating with a common set of metrics and data points going forward.
When we say that 2/3 of the jobs will be requiring some sort of degree or credential beyond high school, much of that need will be filled disproportionately from people who go through the community college system. So that's a long way of saying we can't afford to have enrollment decrease, and we must have graduation rates increase in order to meet our state's needs.
It's absolutely critical to the whole state that Ivy Tech be a success story. I mean, this is the place where most of the people who have not gone to college in past generations or not gone to a technical school beyond high school are going to be going.
Ivy Tech is working on some new things designed to increase student success. The college recently revamped its remediation program and started an accelerated associate's degree program. It's also added a system called intrusive counseling to make sure that students develop and follow an academic completion plan. And now for headlines, we go over to Lindsay Wright, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thank you, Joe. The man convicted of killing Indiana University student Jill Bierman is out of chances to appeal his conviction. John Myers is serving a 65-year sentence, and a court rejected his post-conviction release this week. Bierman was a freshman at IU when she disappeared during a bike ride in 2000. 3 years later, her remains were found in a remote area. She had been shot in the head. Myers had already exhausted all of his options through the standard criminal appeals process. This was his last opportunity to appeal as a civil case. The number of HIV cases in the southeastern Indiana outbreak is now at 163. There are 160 confirmed and 3 preliminary positive cases. Nearly 16,000 dirty needles have been brought in as a part of the Scott County Needle Exchange aimed at stopping the outbreak. More than 20,000 clean needles have been handed out. While the needle exchange programs are one of the many topics lawmakers plan to study more in depth this summer, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles redistricting, whether the state's smoking ban should be extended to bars and casinos, and the possibility of replacing the standardized I-STEP test with a shorter test are also on this summer study committee's agendas. One issue lawmakers will not officially study this summer is the addition of sexual orientation to the state's anti-discrimination laws. But Democrats still plan to introduce legislation next session to amend Indiana's civil rights law with or without a study committee. Indiana is nearing an all-time high in employment. The jobs report released this week shows that the state's unemployment rate declined 0.4% in April to 5.4%. Indiana is now just 7,800 private sector jobs shy of the all-time peak of employment, which occurred in the spring of 2000. April's unemployment drop was led by huge job gains in the trade, transportation, and utilities sectors. Operation of the Indiana Toll Road has officially changed hands. IFM Investors announced Wednesday it had completed its $5.7 billion acquisition of ITR Concession Company, the road's previous operator that went bankrupt. IFM will operate the road for the remaining 66 years of the ITR's lease with the state. The company says it plans to make $260 million in upgrades over the next 5 years, which will include improvements to the toll road plazas and pavement conditions. IFM says it hopes those improvements will enhance the customer experience and create job opportunities for area construction workers. Motorists driving the speed limit in the left lane will soon face a fine under new legislation Governor Mike Pence has signed. The governor enacted a law earlier this week that allows police to issue a $500 ticket to left lane drivers who are going the speed limit and reasonably know a car behind them is trying to pass. The law does not apply in bad weather, heavy traffic, when exiting to the left, tolls, or pulling over for an emergency vehicle. A bill advancing through the Senate would help veterans suffering with mental health issues and their families. The bill, co-authored by Indiana Senator Joe Donnelly, gives veterans and their families access to local providers for help with post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health issues linked to their service. It also calls for training for local centers to help them understand the unique issues veterans deal with. Indiana has VA hospitals in Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, and Marion, and outpatient clinics in 15 more cities. But Donnelly says the flow of veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan is too great for the VA to handle alone. The woman whose death sentence got worldwide attention almost 3 decades ago committed suicide this week. Paula Cooper was at one time the youngest person in the U.S. on death row. She was 15 when she stabbed an elderly woman to death during a robbery in Gary in 1986. Cooper's death sentence was commuted by the Indiana Supreme Court in 1989. She was released from prison in 2013 and lived in Indianapolis. Police say she died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. She was 45 years old. Indiana Congressman Todd Young introduced a bill Tuesday that will reduce taxes on distilled spirits, making it cheaper for distilleries to produce alcohol. Young says he hopes the bill will lead to more jobs, higher pay, and an expansion of the industry throughout southern Indiana. Owner of the Bloomington distillery Cardinal Spirits, Adam Quirk, says the act would give them the same benefits as breweries and wineries.
So if this passes, it's going to incentivize people to start new distilleries, and it's also going to help existing distilleries like us to help grow. We've already made a pretty massive investment, both in money and jobs in the community. So this is just going to help further that investment.
Congressman Young says if the bill does not pass this time around, he will reintroduce it next session. Posters and photos of birds will take the place of live birds at this year's state fair. A statewide ban on poultry shows means no exhibitions of any kind. The ban is the result of a bird flu outbreak that's killed 40 million birds nationwide. Indiana is the 11th state to issue such a ban. California is experiencing one of the worst droughts on record, and now agricultural economists say you could begin to feel the impact at the grocery store. The price increase won't be huge because the products most of us get from California account for only about 10% of what we spend on food, but shoppers can expect noticeable hikes on the cost of items such as broccoli, cauliflower, lettuce, and nuts because California produces a majority of those products. And an organic grocery delivery service will start filling orders in Bloomington and Martinsville today. Green Bean Grocery celebrated its expansion this week by donating 1 ton of fresh produce, including potatoes, onions, and turnips to the Hoosier Hills Food Bank. Green Bean is headquartered in Indianapolis and services customers around the Midwest. And Joe Green Bean spokesperson Tricia Brand says Bloomington has been on the company's radar for a long time because it already has the market of people who are interested in this healthy eating.
Well, quite an impact. We talked about Lucky's Market opening and then Whole Foods coming too. Thanks a lot, Lindsay. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Thousands of bombs that could detonate litter this area in Jefferson County. But residents are more worried about the depleted uranium underground. Ahead, what will the Army do to keep people safe? Half of the members on the state's education policymaking panel are being replaced starting next week. Who will be making the decisions that affect Indiana students? And will it reduce the controversy that's plagued the state's Board of Education? And a new baseball team debuts Kokomo's controversial stadium. We'll tell you more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
I can change the world with my own two hands, make it a better place with my own two hands. I'm gonna make it a brighter place with my own two hands. I'm gonna help the human race with my own two hands. I can hold you in my own two hands, and I can comfort you with my own two hands, with my own two hands.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. The Jefferson Proving Grounds in southeast Indiana used to be an Army testing site, and remnants of that era, including unexploded bombs and depleted uranium, remain. Now the Army is asking the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission to stop regulating the area, and as Gretchen Frazee reports, that worries residents who fear their drinking water could become contaminated.
One wrong step at this worksite could be fatal. Thousands of unexploded bombs dot the landscape here at the Jefferson Proving Grounds, which served as an Army testing site for more than a half-century.
Starting tomorrow, we'll be going in there and just doing straight construction work.
These men are tasked with removing the bombs in this area to make way for a new road. So far, they found dozens that, if run over by a construction vehicle, could easily explode.
Testing here started back in 1941, so up until that time we've tested just about every type of explosive round that the Army and basically DoD, Air Force as well.
Colonel Elmer Spates is in charge of Army operations at the Jefferson Proving Grounds. The Department of Natural Resources handles more day-to-day operations. That's because the 50,000-acre area consists of several subsections. The northern part of the refuge is still used as a bombing range for the Air Force. Most of the rest of it has been turned into the Big Oaks National Wildlife Refuge. Visitors can enter the refuge if they abide by certain precautions, such as staying on the roads and not venturing into areas that have been cordoned off. One of those areas is the 2,000-acre depleted uranium zone.
Specifically, what's in this area, it's a depleted uranium penetrator, and they're usually used to defeat any enemy armor. And we fire them from our main battle tanks, what most people know as M1A1 nowadays, and M1A2.
Depleted uranium occurs naturally in the environment, but in concentrated amounts, it's toxic. That's why the Nuclear Regulatory Commission holds a license that requires the Army to regularly test the groundwater here to ensure the depleted uranium isn't leaking into the water. The Army is asking the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to dissolve that license. They say it isn't needed anymore, and it creates more paperwork for the Army to keep up with. That worries some residents who live just outside the Proving Grounds gates and further downstream.
I don't see why they couldn't just go in and clean it up, and then we wouldn't have to worry about the leaching into the soils and the water tables and affecting the wildlife and, of course, humanity down the stream. The major issue is the fact that if it would flow into the Ohio River, and of course we get our water, most of the utilities get their water from Madison.
Army officials say it's too expensive to remove all the unexploded bombs and depleted uranium. But there are some safeguards. To get the license decommissioned, the Army needs to prove that it has measures in place that ensure depleted uranium levels will not exceed 25 millirem per year, or about 2.5 times the amount of depleted uranium naturally found in the environment. And it has to prove, if for some reason those safety measures went away, levels would not exceed 100 millirem, or 10 times natural levels.
In the Army's official proposal, they have said that they would not conduct additional testing. However, since they continue to own the property, if they want to conduct additional water testing, they certainly have the prerogative to do that, and there would be nothing that would prevent them from doing that.
We will continue to monitor this area and to keep their families safe. And if there is anything that happens that we notice any kind of migration of any type, we'll make sure they're alerted and we take actions to either stop the migration or make sure water's all clean and make sure children down south of this thing can safely play in the streams.
Jefferson County Commissioner Robert Little says he wants some assurances, and so far, the Army hasn't offered to meet with him.
I think they could be a little more open with us and bring us on board and explain exactly what's going on and, who's calling the shots and what their intent is going to be.
The Army doesn't have any long-term plans for the Jefferson Proving Grounds, but they say they don't plan to walk away anytime soon.
The National Regulatory Commission expects to make its decision on whether to decommission the Army's license sometime in 2016. At the State Board of Education's meeting next week, half of the board will be new, as Governor Pence and top lawmakers capitalized on a new law that lets them reconstitute the board. To explain who the new members are and what this means for education policy in the state, Claire McInerney of our StateImpact team joins us. Claire, let's start off first about who is leaving the state board and then who's coming in to replace them.
Sure. So 5 people were not reappointed, and those people are Brad Oliver, Dan Elsner, Andrea Neal, Troy Albert, and Tony Walker. And they're being replaced by Eddie Melton, who is a businessman up in Maryville, Vince Bertram, who's the CEO of Project Lead the Way, which creates math and science curriculum for schools, Leanne Kwiatkowski, who's an assistant superintendent in Warren Township Schools in Indianapolis, Steve Yeager, a recently retired superintendent from Fort Wayne, and Byron Ernest, who is the head of a network of charter schools. I think it's interesting to note that with this new board and the new appointments, there are more people that work in schools or closely with students every day than the previous board. There were people who worked at colleges or as attorneys, and so they didn't necessarily interact with students and teachers directly, but this new board has more people that do.
Now, I think what's on everybody's mind is that we all know that there's been some tension between Glenda Ritz and at least the previous board members. Do you think some of these new board members are going to help ease that and get things done?
I think everybody's hoping that. It was the intention of Governor Pence and the legislature when they wrote this law. And Governor Pence said this week when he made his appointments that he hopes it's a fresh start. I talked to a lot of the new members, and they are sharing that sentiment. But I think something really important to note is that 2 of the most vocal opponents of Glenda Ritz, who really caused a lot of the long discussions and things like that, were Brad Oliver and Dan Elsner, and they're not returning. So we might see more cordial relations. But the new members are all saying they're hoping they can focus on education policy and not repeat the past. I did talk to Vince Bertram, who's one of the new members, and here's him talking a little bit about that.
Well, I think with any group, there are certain dynamics that play. And, I tend to look at that and as a past tense, right? That's something that happened, and we're all aware of it. We read about it, we all lived it, but today's a new opportunity.
Something important, though, is a lot of the fighting and disagreements and arguments over miscommunication didn't just come from board members or people attacking Ritz. A lot of times it was miscommunications with their 2 staffs. So even though we have fresh faces and people who don't have this baggage and history of drama on the board, we might need to see better communication between everyone involved rather than just adding some new people.
And we just have a few more seconds. What are some of those issues going to be that they're going to hop into right away when they get going next week?
Overseeing the creation of the new ISTEP, figuring out what to do with turnaround schools and how districts can improve those failing schools, and figuring out how charter schools will be able to use new money allocated toward them.
All right, thank you very much, Claire.
Thanks, Joe.
Despite being 5 weeks behind schedule, Kokomo officials say opening day in their new baseball stadium is a go for Saturday. I was there earlier this week and can say the controversy and lawsuits over the stadium's construction are nearly resolved, and excitement has replaced any doubts about Kokomo's newest tourist attraction. With only a couple days before opening night, Mayor Greg Goodnight says workers are busy getting the essentials prepared at Municipal Stadium for the debut of Kokomo's baseball team, the Jackrabbits.
Stadium will be ready, will not be completed.
He says most of the 2,500 infield seats are sold, but a few lawn seats are still available. Workers on Tuesday were still attaching seats, sanding walls, and tucking mortar. Jackrabbits head coach Greg Van Horn looked on. Unbelievable is how he describes the new stadium.
It's amazing, I'm so impressed. I say this all the time, I'm just amazed at how many man-hours go into building a stadium like this. It's really cool to be here.
But Mayor Goodnight is still sweeping up the mess surrounding the stadium over FEMA flood mitigation grants and green spaces.
Yeah, we're working to resolve it. For example, our field surface was submitted in January. It took a long time before they finally approved it, but they approved our original plans for turf, the permeable sidewalks.
The city is also able to keep the stadium funded throughout the year without using city tax dollars. Goodnight says the team leases the stadium from the city, pays all the utilities, and maintains the field, while area high school teams will use the facility for free and keep ticket revenue. First pitch is under the lights Saturday at 7:05. That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. And by WTIU members. Thank you.